we briefly did a grid search. One of us went right, one left, one center, and we just kind of went out and around the high and the low where we thought this deer could have went, and reconvened at the road. And at that point, the last ditch effort was obviously to bring in the dogs, which we should have done from the get-go.
Well, hey everybody, welcome back to the Hunter's Advantage podcast. Today I'm joined by a special guest. I'm not even going to call him a guest because he's a good friend and hunting buddy, Jake Ayers. What's going on, dude?
Hey man, how's it going?
It's going. We got a couple deer down this last weekend, so life is a lot better. Lauren and I are going to Maine for a holiday that's made up completely by women who want to go on vacation called the Baby Moon. That's
okay.
It's a new holiday. So
I've never heard that one coined before.
You just wait.
I'm going to have one too.
You'll have a baby moon, yeah, because Lauren will post it on Instagram and your wife will be like, that's cute. I want to do that.
That's how trends start.
Yeah, exactly. It's just another excuse to go on a vacation. So Jake was with us and we went to on a public land mountain hunt this last weekend. And we're going to do what we like to call a hunt talk in this episode, which is basically just a play-by-play recap of what we were doing, what we were up to, what we were thinking about, some of the decisions we made, and then obviously the outcomes. We have a lot of formats that we have in the show. We do interviews and live podcasts, but this is one of our favorites to do, is just the hunt talk, because it's just water cooler talk, talking about hunting. So that's what we're going to do today. And I don't want to show a spoiler, but if people have seen the thumbnail, they probably can see what happened. But so this was your first time coming out to hunt mountain bucks, right? I know you do a lot of mountain turkey hunting, but first time hunting mountain bucks this weekend?
First time hunting mountain bucks. Yeah, I've been over in that same neck of the woods before chasing Easterns, and, obviously bumped into deer sign and always kind of had the itch. Plus you guys for, I don't know, it started probably back whenever we first met in college, I guess. Junior year. So we're going on 7 years. You guys have been trying to pull me down to those mountains, and finally, just kind of on a whim, made sure we made it happen this year. So it was a lot of fun. It was neat country.
You finally gave up and gave in?
Yeah, I was just tired of Peyton nagging at me. I figured I'd get him off my back. Come awesome. Show him that it can be done. It doesn't take 4 years to get a shot off on a decent buck.
That's what's funny is Peyton's like, well, come down here and embrace the suck, and then you shoot a buck the first sit. You're like, what are you guys complaining about? This. So
I don't know if it's an accurate depiction of how one ought to expect his hunts to go, but
no,
it did that time. No,
that's not. When people think of mountain hunting, they don't think of picking a spot on the map, walking in and shooting a buck and being able to go home. That's not what people think of.
Yeah, no, I suspect it's quite a bit more challenging that on average, but like Jake said, he likes layups. I do too. We'll take it.
I like fast break layups. So what was your you hunt a lot in Southwest Oklahoma, and obviously you've done a lot of Midwest hunting in Kansas and stuff. What was your kind of expectations for coming to the mountains, and kind of what were you looking for from an e-scouting perspective, without giving too much about where
right.
Generally speaking?
Yeah. Obviously, whenever you look at the map, it's like going anywhere new to you. You see it and you wonder what that is actually like once you get your boots on the ground. And that's probably one of the biggest challenges that anybody that hunts public faces, in my opinion, is just, your perception of what the topography is what you're reading. Is that the way that it actually is, or is it different? And, I remember maybe a year ago or even 2 years ago, I showed you a spot on the map and said, well, what do you think about this spot? You're like, well, if you want to walk 2 miles, that's great. 600 feet of elevation change and 2 miles deep is quite the feat. And so you get there and you realize the scale of things. But personally, what I was looking at was, I don't think it was any different from what you and the other guys were looking for. It's just edge, just like turkeys, just like deer. Anything I think that we hunt usually tends to travel along those edges. And so corridors and edges is what I was paying attention to. And obviously, they've done a really great job of the improvement of the timber out there. And so you could find areas where they've gone in and done some timber stand improvement, and then obviously just following the creek lines and then hard banks where there's harder drop-offs. So you know that those deer are either going to be forced to go down low or go up high on the ridges. And then just thinking about what are they eating, because this time of year we could be, but it's also been 80, 90 degrees. And so it's, I've seen October 20th roll around and we're in full pre-rut, just right around the corner, rut's coming. But this time, this year, that's not really the case. It's been so warm. I think that we're still focusing on food and then probably bedding transitions. So that's what I had on my mind. I was just thinking, where can I find them going back to, sleep? It was a morning hunt. I really prefer personally to try to catch them going back to bed. It's just a preference thing. I mean, in the evenings, I feel like this time of year when it's so hot, your best chance is catching them in the morning, going back to from feeding to bedding. And in the evenings, you're obviously trying to catch them from bedding to food. I just think that it's a narrower window.
So talking about like expectations versus reality and going and hunting this spot, what did the mountains look like from an aerial onX perspective to when you actually put boots on the ground? What was the difference? Did it change like how you looked at the map once you had seen it a little bit, or was it pretty on par?
Maybe a little of both. Because there's changes that are recent that onX can't update quick enough to catch, and so like burns, which I didn't see any whenever we were there, but where they've gone in and recently done TSI. Can change the way something looks in person based off of, what you've seen on a map. And so that first evening I got there, I just drove around and I would look at my map and then I would compare it to what I was seeing in person, and I would just make mental notes. Okay, this is what this looks like in person. And, so I kind of expected, what it looks like to at least a certain extent, but I would say, the mountains, they're really dramatic, but you're able to kind of get in there. And if you're hunting low, you're kind of low already. I mean, and if you're high, you're already high already. So I didn't find myself getting really fatigued walking in. And, probably part of that is just the distance from the road that I was hunting. But altogether, I mean, I felt like it was pretty similar to what I would have expected it to be. It's a lot of open grass, kind of a mosaic of open grassland savanna, and then you had hard timber and pines, up on the tops in some areas.
And from a bedding perspective, like you kind of get this thing in the mountains where if you're sitting in a spot, you're like, okay, I kind of feel like I'm on a good edge. I kind of got a good idea of where they might be bedding and, how they might funnel through this corridor. But what was your perception on like, okay, in this TSI, they've created such good bedding cover that you can kind of surround yourself in a lot of ways with bedding cover. Did you think about that? Or are you just like, hey, I'm going to get in this terrain feature and edge and just kind of see what happens? Because you're obviously very cognizant of playing the wind, and it kind of changes things a little bit when they can bed in a lot of different areas.
Yeah, it does. And probably, again, part of that goes back to just being lucky, because the inferences that I've drawn on bedding has only been derived from what you guys have told me. And so y'all kind of gave me a hint that, hey, they'd like to bed in these grassy slopes where there's maybe some sparse timber, but walking through to one of Jake's spots, we saw a buck and he was bedded down in what I would have considered to be relatively heavy timber, hardwoods. And it was on a slope. Trying to think of, we had a southeast wind and he was facing the northeast. Not that has to matter, but I felt like he was trying to look down the ridge. He was looking down the slope and then hoping that anything coming from behind, he was going to catch that scent. That changed some things just as as far as my perception of bedding cover goes. I really anticipated that they would primarily bed in the tall grass. And the evening hunt that I got to go on the night after, I guess it had been Saturday, I do believe that I saw, a small buck get out of his bedding in the tall grass. So I just don't know that I really have had an opportunity to hunt the area enough to say, to objectively state, okay, they use this predominantly for bedding or they use that. Because I've seen them do both. just from the 2 hunts that I've had.
It's kind of you hear that term a lot, like you hear bed to food and you hear that terminology a lot. And it's, when you go to the Midwest and there's big block timber and all the food is harvested and there's not really very much place to hide except for really good grasses that maybe are in CRP or something, or big timber stands. Yeah. It doesn't make the game any easier, but it makes it simpler from a scouting perspective. You're like, okay.
Yeah, it does. And I think, if I were to hunt the place enough, probably I would deduce that they do, in fact, bed mostly in the tall grass. I remember hunting, in Kansas, and I snuck in on a spot right up against a creek line, had good heavy timber, mature trees, and it overlooked, I don't know how many acres. I think it was a quarter section, but it was split in half by a tree row. So 80 and 80 essentially is what you had. And I sat there all the way up until about 10 minutes before the end of shooting light, and I saw 3 bucks stand up out of the grass. It's like, you would have never known that they were there. And really, how do you hunt that? You just kind of have to figure out where their trails are and where they're going. And that's probably one of the biggest challenges that I think this particular area has, is like, where are they going? Because that evening hunt that I went on Saturday, I got to the tree, saw a buck stand, or I didn't see him stand up, but I presume he was getting out of bedding and he headed to the south. Well, then, 15 minutes later, I see 2 does, and they're working the same edge of trees heading north. And then later that afternoon, I had a doe that cut to the northwest. And it's like, what do you know and what do you know that I don't know? Because I want to be where everybody's going, but you're all going somewhere different. So how do you hunt that?
They switch. They're like, we'll go here and we'll swap. Y'all do that in the evening. We'll do that in the morning. And we'll swap. Like, exactly. That's what I'm saying. I hunted a bull down there one time that was like, okay, I feel like I'm 360 surrounded, and at any given time, the deer can come from any direction, and there's not a hard edge in that spot. And so it's like, okay, you're kind of just sacrificing a side and being like, they come from that side, I'm done. But anywhere else, I'm going to be okay.
Yeah, you have to. In the spot that I hunted, my wind was basically pushing through the center of what I anticipated was the bedding. And, you just kind of have to hope that, they either come down this funnel and stay on that corner of the bedding, or, work through your front, working the creek line. I mean, there's so much topography and so many different potentials on that place that you just have to sacrifice something. I do think that playing your wind to the best of your ability is wise, but at the end of the day, you just have to get out there and hunt, because there's no guarantee where those deer are coming from and where they're going.
Yeah, I think it's time on stand is the understanding what you're looking for, getting in a place that you think is good, and then time on stand, and being able to make changes. So on that first morning, I think you were originally thinking about getting up there on Thursday, and being able to hunt, but you said you were able to drive around a little bit on Thursday evening and kind of get a lay of the land. What was your Friday morning kind of plan or idea for your first hunt?
Again, just using those edges that I mentioned, but I like to walk in line with what I think the wind is supposed to be doing. And so we had a southeast wind, and I've heard you guys talk about not needing to get off of the road all too far. Although I like to be far enough away that if somebody does drive through in the good time of your hunt, that it's not enough to influence or redirect their movement, because if you have something that's in play and a vehicle comes by and messes it up, that's a pretty defeating feeling.
Well, like a guy driving by and hunting turkeys and honking like that?
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. But yeah, so I tried to park where I could walk in a line, pretty much A to B without having to zigzag all throughout what I thought was bedding cover, and pretty much just eliminate as much, I guess, disbursement of scent as I could. Otherwise, it was just hoping, and really I feel like it was like hunting a rut funnel, and you just got lucky that they were moving through there then.
You talk about disbursement of scent. Well, there was no disbursement of scent because I was in that spot 20 hours earlier hanging cameras. We were talking about that scent disbursement. I said there wasn't any reason to play the wind or the scent because we had walked through there 20 hours earlier hanging a camera.
Yeah.
This is kind of one of the issues with with having a buddy who doesn't really want any specific information. You're like, give me general information that I can derive from, but I still want to pick my own spot and go scout and hunt.
If you guys are anything like us, you love being in the deer woods and chasing big bucks. But there's another part of you that has that itch to chase other big game species.
If you've ever dreamed of chasing black bear, mule deer, or moose, Alberta, Canada is the land of opportunity for these adventure-style hunts.
Each year, hundreds of first-time visiting hunters from around the world come to Alberta for the options, quality, and accessibility that the land offers.
With over 1,800 Boone and Crockett entries and endless possibilities of taking multiple species on a single trip, Alberta is truly a paradise for a big game hunter. This is why we partnered up with the Alberta Professional Outfitters Society. To check it out, go to apos.ab.ca and click Find an Outfitter. From there, you can browse all the different big game species and hunting styles that fit with what you want out of the hunt.
Or you can send a free hunt inquiry through the Follow the Lead tool, and the outfitters who have what you are looking for will reach out to you directly.
So make sure to check out apos.ab.ca to learn all about hunting in Alberta and get connected to the right outfitter for you.
Mean that your friend might be sitting in a spot where you're like, I know that's amazing, and I've hunted in there before, but I'd never hunted in there before. So all you did was confirm that there was a good buck in there.
Yeah, it was funny. I mean, we got to the gas station. I was sitting there doing a little bit of work, and Jake just starts laughing. And he's looking at his phone, and I go, "What are you laughing at?" And he turns his phone around, and there's a pin about 50 yards away from where my tree stand was hung, and it was a camera pin. And he was like, "Me and Christian walked in there yesterday and hung a camera." I was like, "We should have let me know that yesterday. Wouldn't have gone in there." He's like, "Well, I didn't even put two and two together."
It's so funny. So you went into that spot on Friday, and kind of how did your hunt transpire?
Yeah. So I mean, I got in there about 6:20, 6:30 or something. It took me a little while to hang my set. I think I finally sat down in my tree at 6:50. You and I had talked about it. I'm pretty particular about which tree I sit in. So I sat there and analyzed that for about 5-10 minutes before I made my mind up. And, really was just hoping that your, read on the topography was going to result in a decent hunt. And I got set down. The thermals were rolling over that hill, and I mean, they were headed straight to the southeast, whereas we were supposed to have a wind that was coming from the southeast blowing to the northwest. And I was like, well, kind of sacrificing that corridor, with what's going on here. And so I knew at that point, I set up in an oak tree, and there was a few other mature oak trees off to my left, which would have been the northeast. And I mean, I was just thinking they're going to have to come from the creek up from the northwest, or they're going to have to come from the draw that was up from your camera, which would have been back to the west. West, northeast, and then west. And so about 8:30, I'd sit there, and it was the craziest thing. So I was sitting there, I was getting kind of cold, and I thought, I'm going to draw my bow back just to kind of get a feel for the swing of it, and then also just get some circulation moving. And so I already had my bow sitting in my lap. There wasn't anything to hang it on, and so I like to kind of keep it there. That way I'm prepared if something does come through. And so I grabbed my bow, and I set the cam on my knee. Then I went ahead and locked into my D-loop. And as I'm sitting there, I'm thinking, okay, it's time to, I'm going to draw back. And I hear something. I look over my left shoulder, and this doe, and she comes up from the creek. Now, she was old as Methuselah. I mean, I could see every single vertebrae in her spine. You could see every rib. And she works in to about 15 yards, and there's an oak tree, and she's feeding under it. And then I hear an acorn drop from my right shoulder, and she perks her ears up. She looks at it, and she starts walking over to it. And as soon as she does, she hears something back the way that she came. And so she stops and she turns around, and it had been back to the northeast. I see this buck, and he comes up from the creek bottom, and he's just staring at her. And he takes a few more steps, and she wheels out and back to the north, goes up the hill. And I just thought, oh my gosh, like that's, immediately it was one of those deer where you don't even have to think. You just of course, I'm already locked into my D-loop, so I'm flinging an arrow no matter what, right?
What do you mean you don't have to think? You're almost in full draw already.
Yeah, that's right. So he sits there and he looks at her for just a few seconds and then proceeds to walk in the same trail. There's 2 oak trees, and he stopped near the second one. And then at that point, I'm kind of trying to turn my body, just ever so slightly because it was already off my left shoulder. And he closes the distance another 5 yards and walks behind that oak tree. And as soon as he goes behind it, that's whenever I drew back, and he clears it, and I grunt at him. And I just tried to put the pin right behind his shoulder, and I didn't really account for how much he was quartering towards me as he was walking in. And that's kind of what I have asked myself numerous times because of how far the shot came out back, is if he actually curled his body towards me whenever I grunted, because it was a pretty steep angle. There's a sharp turn. And so anyways, I shot, and as soon as I hit, I saw the impact of the arrow, and he straightened that body out. And I thought I was probably 10 to 12 inches behind the elbow. Didn't like that. And I watched him, he went up the same direction that doe did and went on top of the ridge and lost his momentum. And then, pretty much just started to hobble. Just kind of hunched over, and he would walk a few steps and then stop. And I was like, that's not good. That's pretty typical for gut. And I knew that my shot it looked back. And so anyways, he worked up to the top and went behind a suit, sat there and watched him, and he disappeared. And then he reemerges. I don't know if he bedded down or if he just got behind enough, brush that it was too thick to see. And then there was some tall native grass. He went behind it, lost sight of him again, and then a second time, he reemerges and he back to the northeast. And as he was up there on the ridge, I could see a protrusion in front of his back hip, and it was about the size, half, 3/4 of the size of your fist, and it was just intestines. And so I thought, that is no bueno. That's not what you want to see. And so I sat there for 10 or 15 minutes just watching him through my binoculars, and then he finally disappeared over the ridge, marked where I thought I saw him go last. And that's when you start replaying everything in your mind, and you're like, okay, did I clip a lung? Was it gut all the way through? I just don't know anymore what's going on because the shot came out back so far.
Yeah.
And at that point, the thermals were still cutting to the southeast, and he had gone northeast. And so I felt fairly comfortable getting down and then taking my boots off, and I was going to try to sneak up to him in my socks and at least pop another shot off at, 40 or 50 yards if I could. And that's kind of the desperation that you, that you start to think about trying, getting down out of your stand and getting another shot off on this deer, just because I've seen where you get a gut shot on a buck, they are going to die. It's just, are you going to find them? And so it felt worth the gamble in the moment. So I climbed out. I thought I was going to at least go check my arrow because I did think that there was a chance I clipped, his front lung. And that's whenever I saw pretty good blood. It wasn't frothy, so I knew that it likely wasn't that. It wasn't lung, but there was gut matter, bile, and then good, relatively light colored blood. And so I thought, well, there's, a chance that I did hit something better than just guts. And so I took up his trail for about 30 yards, and it was good blood the whole way. And that's whenever I kind of got stumped, and I really didn't want to just rummage around too much. The last time that I had seen him go over the ridge was 150, 200 yards. So I already felt pretty invasive walking around. So anyways, that's when we backed out, or whenever I backed out.
You hadn't found your arrow or anything at that point?
I had found my arrow. It blew straight through him, and, 2.5 links of the arrow. There was blood that had, sprayed past the shot. It looked, it looked better than I thought that it was whenever I saw my impact.
Yeah. So you went back, and I was driving back from Southwest because I shot that buck immediately, got in the car and started headed back your way. I knew you were going to shoot a buck as soon as I left, and I just knew that was going to happen. And so you waited till, what was it, about 3 o'clock, and went back in, and I ended up coming back and having to deal with the buck I had in the back of my truck. Like, I don't know what it was, but there was not a single fly where I was in Southwest. And when I drove back over to the east, the second I pulled into the camp, I mean, when I say hundreds, I'm not exaggerating. Hundreds of flies started to come into that body cavity of that buck, and I was like, this buck's not going to be good in 3 hours. Like, because I had gutted him and threw several bags of ice in there, and I was like, this isn't going to work. So I had to stay back and skin that buck out, and selfishly, I was like, I hope they do find the deer, but I was like, I really want to be a part of the track, so maybe they won't find the deer. And then so what happened when you guys went back? You took Jake and Peyton back to look for blood, because we originally had talked about getting a dog, but I think the initial good blood had given you like maybe a false sense of confidence of like, hey, maybe it was a lot better than I thought.
Yeah, it did, and I mean, I felt fairly confident at that point that if I didn't get a lung, that I had at least gotten liver. And so the thought process was, well, I shot him at roughly 8:30. I'd like to give him, 6 hours at least. And so we went back in, 3:30, something like that. And whenever I took his blood trail up that morning, obviously whenever it's bright and it's still fresh, it pops off of the grass and the leaves a lot more clearly. But I had taken some tissue paper in there, as any hunter probably should in the morning.
Or times, but yeah.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I would just tear a little piece off and set it next to each blood. That way I could kind of mark the trail, and we wouldn't have as hard of a time picking that back up when we came in. And, whenever we got there, it was immediately deflating, because where I knew there was supposed to be blood, we couldn't see it anymore. I had even, staked my arrow in where the impact site was, and that stretch of, blood that I had seen, it was really challenging to pick those up. And so, Jake, he actually was able to find, so once we got past that 30-yard marker and really couldn't just keep on a trail, we would bounce to those 2 or 3 spots where I had seen him pause for more substantial amount of time. And I knew it was just, it's kind of like whenever you shoot a dove, you're like, yeah, he fell there, and then he's another 10 feet past it. And so it was kind of what we were dealing with. It was like, well, he's somewhere in this area is where he was standing, which is tough whenever it's 4 to 6, feet tall grass. And so anyways, Jake actually picked up 2 or 3 different locations where he had paused for a moment. And again, it was a little deflating, because where we were hoping there to be at least a puddle of blood, we were picking up, quarter-sized dots. And so, I guess being a little ignorant to blood trailing, anybody probably would assume that's not a good thing, whenever you don't have a lot of blood. But anyways, we worked past it, and we went towards the pine tree where I had last seen him drop over the ridge. And Jake found his last bed right there. There was a tree, and you could see where he had curled up for a moment. And again, you had that was probably the most blood that we had found beyond the impact site. And even it was just maybe a $half. So just not much to go off of. And so at that point, we briefly did a grid search. One of us went right, one left, one center, and we just kind of went out and around the high and the low where we thought this deer could have went, and reconvened at the road. And at that point, the last ditch effort was obviously to bring in the dogs, which we should have done from the get-go. But
did he bed down where he kind of exited after you shot him? Was that where you had accessed it and to leave, or had you went up to the top?
Kind of northeast. Where we walked in was kind of more northwest to southeast. If you were cutting an angle through the property, it was kind of northwest to southeast. And he really ran initially he ran northwest and then curled back northeast. And so he ended up, on a different path by at least 100 yards, maybe 150. So I wondered that whenever we went back in. I was concerned that at least if it wasn't the noise, I was concerned that our wind wouldn't, if we worked that far at some point and the wind was true southeast, if it wouldn't.
Listen, guys, we wouldn't be able to do the podcast if it wasn't for you all. So we just want to say that you guys are greatly appreciated, and thank you for following along each week.
And speaking of support, we are partnered with Out on a Limb Manufacturing, and I can tell you from firsthand experience, Matt and Chase are great, down-to-earth guys, and they make some of the best saddle hunting products out there. Whether you're looking for a set of climbing sticks or a mobile, lightweight, hang-on tree stand, or maybe you're even a one-sticker.
You mean tree Pilates?
Yes, tree Pilates. If you've been to the grocery store or the gas station lately, you know that Uncle Joe is doing his absolute worst to take all your money. That's why we need hunting gear that lasts year after year. And trust me, I've been rocking the same Out on a Limb Shakar climbing sticks for 4 years and the Ridge Runner 2.0 saddle hunting platform for a few years as well. This gear is built to last.
We can confidently say that Out on a Limb is the best bang for your buck.
And it's the best gear if you want to deflate a big old buck.
Ooh. Make sure you use code HNTA15 at outonalimbmfg.com for 15% off anything on their website.
So if you can show them the same support that you guys show us, please go to outonalimbmfg.com and use code HNTA15 for 15% off at checkout. Now let's get back to the podcast.
So when we found that empty bed and seeing how much he was hobbling or hunched over whenever I shot him, that question obviously crosses your mind. Did we bump him? I'm not sure. I'm not sure if we did, but
it's probably a coin flip from a bump to a deer gets hit, he beds down, and he's like, well, I can make it a little further, so let's keep going.
Yeah, and the truck is only 300-400 yards away, so whenever I snuck out, I very well could have made it all the way back to the pickup without being detected, but then whenever I start the pickup, I just backed all the way out. But even just starting the vehicle could have been enough to stir him.
So where were you at? Obviously, you come down, first time seeing the place, you go out, first sit, you shoot a really nice buck, and here you are in the situation where, you've looked for blood, didn't find him the first time, kind of backed out, came in, grid searched a little bit, found more blood, backed out. Where were you at mentally on your probability of finding this buck when you're like, okay, now I'm going to option number 3?
Worth it. It's like we're still in the game. It's fourth quarter. We better throw a Hail Mary. We want to bring home the championship. Probable, I would guess. I felt 40-60 on it. I really didn't anticipate being able to recover him. A grid search in there is almost ridiculous to even consider trying for more than. It's a luck. It's just a luck game. So, at that point, I just was going off of your word, and you had told me that Mitch and Carrie and their dogs were really good. And that was an experience that was equal or surpassed just the actual shooting the deer for me, because I've never really been a part of many blood trails with dogs to begin with, but certainly nothing on par with what their capabilities are. So, probability wise, I didn't think that it was super high, but I was also just kind of floating on yours and Jake's confidence. Jake, does a good job, and something I really appreciate, because I get down, mentally, and I think it's easy to be the one that pulled the trigger and shot the deer, and you're the one that's in the hot seat. So it sucks, to think that you may not recover it. And, but nonetheless, that's what a good buddy and a good hunting companion does, is just kind of keeps your attitude up. And, I don't know, kind of from start to finish, he did that, finding those 2 or 3 different spots where we had lost the blood trail all the way to, not recovering the deer to calling in the dog and be like, dude, we're going to find that deer, we're going to find that deer. And it was never not that. So a big part of it, obviously, is going to that camp is the camaraderie aspect, but just having those people there to kind of pick you up even whenever you're in a poor situation like that. So, personally, it was low, but I had you guys and y'all were pretty encouraging and had high regards for Mitch and Carrie and their dogs. And so, I was just hoping that it would work.
Well, that's the deer camp aspect, right? Like somebody could say, "Hey, I shot and the deer took off running, and I cut 4 hairs off of his tail," and we're like, "We got 8 people. There's no way we won't find it," you know. And you're like, "No, I cut hair off it." You're like, "It's dead. We'll find it."
Yeah.
So yeah, I remember that we were sitting back at the truck, and you're like, "What are the odds that we find this deer with these dogs?" I was like, "You shot it and you saw guts hanging out," and you're like, "Yeah." I was like, "We'll find it, 100%." I was like, "Yeah, we'll find it." And Mitch and Carrie, what was the conversation that you had with Mitch? Because those dog trackers are very anti grid search, very, those dogs are working on, not just blood, but scent coming off of in between the hooves and stuff. So you tracking around in there can be a bad thing. But what did Mitch tell you?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's a disclosure is what it is, but I mean, it makes sense, if that's his business, or if at least that's what they enjoy doing. And they take it seriously. I mean, they're professional about their business. And, he just said, did you guys grid search? And I said, yes. He said, for how long? And I told him, well, I mean, I think it was a rather insignificant grid search comparatively, but I don't know what we're comparing to. And I think that's what they're trying to discern themselves, because I'm sure they get all kinds of feedback from people, some fabricated, some not fabricated, some what they genuinely perceive to be truthful. And when it's their job as the tracker in the recovery is to just sift through the bits of information and make a coherent story, and that's how they get from point A to point B. Because they weren't there, so they can only go off of what you tell them, and they just hope that that's accurate information. And so they probe, a little bit past even just saying, "Did you grid search?" Yes. How much? Not that much. Well, what's not much, And then he kind of elaborated on that to say, "Well, I've had people tell me not much, but it turns out that it was more than just him and his buddy. It was actually, these 6 people, and they did it for an hour, and so that's what I think they're trying to, because what's the probability for them in the recovery if I lie and tell them, yeah, we didn't grid search, but in reality, you say that we had gone in there with 5 people and spent 2 hours tracking it up. Well, it's like, is that something that they want to waste their time on? And they may still come and track it, but they just need to have an accurate understanding of what expectation to have when they turn their dogs loose. So anyways, I don't know if that answers your question, but I mean, I think that's what they're doing when they ask those questions, because it's like going to the doctor. If you go to the doctor and they say, well, what's hurting? And you say, well, my knee, but really it's like, how are they going to help you in that? And I think that it's kind of like,
yeah. Well, I wonder if they use that as a way to, in a season where, your business operates 4 months out of the year and you're taking tracks every night. I think that was like the 3rd track they had been on that day. How do you discern taking one from the other? It's like, well, I would want to go on one where I'm picking up, where I'm like, okay, I got a good opportunity of finding deer, right?
For their dogs, you want if your dogs continually hit strikes, and it's not really because of their ability, but because of, misinformation or just a poor opportunity to begin with. And they can sift through that and know, okay, well, we've been out, doing this for 16 hours. And like the other day, they said that they were up for 2 nights, I think, tracking, two, like 48 hours. They had been going from one to another. And so, they have to, for efficiency's sake, they need to be able to decipher what is this a good opportunity or is it not, and if you're dying, because you want to, I would imagine, I'm just assuming, but you probably want to keep your dog's confidence up too. I mean, what happens if you go on 10 tracks and your dog never recovers a deer? It's like, what are we doing? I would think the dog is thinking that. I would.
Yeah. And it's a lot of it's out of your control with the hunter, and the hunter, like you said, kind of being probing and stuff by Mitch. It's like, they're always going to tell you what you want to hear. Oh, the shot was better than I anticipated. Right. It was bleeding better. I didn't do anything, and because we asked Mitch, and what was cool is when they pulled up, they had you fill out that kind of log of what you thought was happening. And he's talked about that, and they're like, well, what's the accuracy of shot placement based on what the hunter gives you the information? He was like, it's almost never even.
Oh, really?
Oh, almost never. Yeah.
I didn't remember hearing him say that.
That was what he told us last year when he helped us with Justin's deer, because Justin told us that he made a shot pretty similar to what you had described, 10 or 12 inches behind the shoulder, pretty much mid-body, exited in by the back hip.
Right.
And then we found Justin's buck, and it was 15 inches behind and right under the spine and barely went. And we're like, oh, man, and Justin was like, yeah, not a good shot, but that's a very different, expectation between liver or straight guts. And so
exactly.
They brought out their dogs. They have a couple, and this is C&M Game Recovery, I believe is their name. And you
C&M Recovery and Tracking.
Yeah, you can find them on Facebook. They're good folks, and if you're over in eastern or southern Oklahoma, they'll help you out. But so they showed up and they brought their dog. Last year we had used Bodark, which was they're Bavarian mountain hounds, I think is what they are. They're very cute little dogs. They kind of got those big floppy ears, and they came out and they had Bodark, and they also had Cypress, which I think is not a straight sibling, I think a half sister of Bodark. And they brought both those dogs out, and they wanted Cypress to take lead on the track because she had been on several unsuccessful tracks. I think a lot of them, he said they were bad shot placement. And recovery rates are usually like 30 or 40% with dogs. But when you factor in the amount of people who probably are non-lethal hits, it's like the recovery rate's probably pretty good if you took out the non-lethal hits. But those dogs came out, and what happened from there, from your perspective?
Yeah, so mention the part where we met, kind of right there at the trucks.
I was back there battling a Chick-fil-A in the middle of the woods, so I don't know exactly what happened.
Yeah, that's right. So the I believe it was an intern for the Department of Wildlife, specific to this property, had followed them in, and we had double checked regulations just to make sure that this is okay to do. It was after dark, and so we wanted to be certain that we weren't going to be getting in any sort of trouble or getting Mitch and Carrie in trouble for coming on the assist. And so whenever they showed up to my pickup, the intern got out and he came over, and it was just a brief series of questions. And I mean, he was polite and pleasant. It was just direct. What are you guys doing? Where are you going? That you cannot use, just to be clear, you guys cannot use a rifle to dispatch. Yes, sir. Just kind of pretty straightforward, but positive. He said, well, good luck, hope you find him. And so we head off, and they followed us down those awful roads, and probably were already regretting that they had agreed to come. But we get there, and it was just the process is neat, from start to finish, just to see their rig. They show up, and it says, what did it say on the back? Something professional blood tracking.
Yeah, United Blood Tracker or something like that. That they have their truck decked. You will know what they do when you drive their truck. Back glass and the tailgate.
Yeah, it was like a 2500 Dodge Ram, and they've got this super spiffy dog kennel in the back, and these hounds, they're already barking, and they're just like chomping at the bit to get out. And I mean, they weren't loud whenever they actually got out on the ground, but I think it was just like oozing excitement for what's to come. So I mean, we get there, and they've got their harnesses and their leashes, and to see Mitch kind of grab Bodark and take a water bottle and wet down her muzzle and her ears to keep her cool, and for the scent, to help her to pick scent up. And I would have never thought about those things. Like, I've heard before, that moisture aids in their ability, like going bird hunting. They'll say, like, after rain or snow is really helpful for bird hunting, like quail and pheasant. But I didn't really consider that in blood trailing. I just thought, there's the blood, that's what they have to go off of. But you don't really think about all the different things that they're picking up. And so anyways, kind of to see him and Carrie prepare for the actual track was a process, and you could tell it was almost ritualistic. They get them out, they put their harnesses on, and wet their muzzles down, and then he just said, okay, well, let's go to the impact site. And so we go off, and 400 yards in, and get there, and I had moved my arrow from whenever we went in midday to pick the trail up and relocated it to what we had found, deemed to be last blood. And so it was a little bit of a guess. I didn't pin exactly where I had found that initial blood, but then, later, just a few minutes later, we were able to find those little bits of tissue paper where I had actually marked the blood trail. And, no sooner that we get there, Mitch is like, oh yeah, they're on it. They are already, and you could see them, they were just kind of weaving back and forth. They were just kind of amped. And he said, well, how do y'all want to do this? And I was like, and don't ask me, I don't know. I was like, do exactly what y'all want to do. Cause I'm just here, for bits of information if you guys need it. And he said, okay, well, why don't we'd like to work Cypress. And that was their yearling dog. And, I have to admit, like, as the person who's hoping to retrieve their deer, you're like, I'd rather you use the well-trained, 10-year dog.
This is not a test run.
Don't practice on my buck. Go practice on somebody else's.
Yeah.
And, but I just don't think, and I tried, and I did. I had faith through the entire process that we were to recover this deer, even though I didn't feel like it was super probable. But, Carrie, we get the walkie-talkies out. I had one, Mitch had one, Carrie had one. And, Carrie takes Cypress by the leash, and immediately, boom, she's off. And I was just like, that's exactly where that deer went, and I watched her. They curled. Once they got north, they curled back to the east. And Mitch asked me a couple times, he said, well, is she on him? And I said, well, she started off good, but now she's kind of a little too far south into the east. He said, well, those thermals are coming off that hill. She may just be cutting his scent. I was like, I don't know, maybe, I don't know anything about this. So I'm just listening to you guys. And, she calls over the walkie-talkie. They get up on the ridge. And at that point, they had already worked back to the west of the last bed that Jake found underneath that tree. And I thought that was peculiar, because the dog had been online pretty much the entire way. And then all of a sudden is west of what we had, thought to be the last spot. And wasn't just a few minutes later where she said, I got blood, on this ridge, and I'm dropping down into the creek bottom. And then she called out again, like, I've got more blood. And, at that point we were like, okay, because the concern was, are they going to be able to work through what we grid searched? And Mitch had told us that, like, full disclosure, if you guys grid searched, I don't know to what extent it might be a challenge for the dogs. He said, we'll work them through it. But just so you know, that is the one thing that can really mess them up. And so once Carrie got down into the creek and called out that she had found blood, I knew, like, that's new territory. I mean, we've not even made it to that point. So we're on track for getting this job done. And, we just kind of hung back, it seemed like, for probably 10 or 15 minutes. And Carrie, she'd call out over the walkie-talkie, and hey, I just passed the road. I'm on the north side of the road. I picked up blood, and let's go. Like, we're getting somewhere. We're about to pick this deer up, and Mitch is, just kind of lounging, and Bodark is going nuts. She's crawling up on his waist, wanting to get scent free, and he was sitting there, and he'd kind of show us, on his phone, like, man, check this buck out that we tracked, and it was calming, because it's just a little distracting. I think you want to be maybe too much in their business as the person who, and I don't think I was overbearing, but you're just very,
so what's that mean?
You're concerning yourself. Yeah. What are these things? And so for him to take the time to just kind of storytell and keep us preoccupied while Carrie and Cypress were taking up the trail, I enjoyed it. I thought it was a lot of fun. And then, of course, Carrie and Cypress, they got sent off track. They took a pretty hard 90-degree turn back to the east. And she said that he started pulling on the leash, which supposedly means that they've maybe crossed hot scent, And so asking Mitch what that meant, was that it was either the buck was still alive or another deer had crossed its trail and kind of mixed the scent and then carried it with it wherever it went. And so that was, that was the concern that Carrie had. And she finally just encouraged Mitch, hey, bring boat arc, let's, trail behind us and see what you pick up. And so we did. And we found blood across the creek or across the road on the north. Yep. And Jake called out multiple times, hey, here's blood, here's blood. And so I felt pretty good about what we were doing. And then we did take that hard right, and we went up that ridge and basically made a giant loop and met back at the road. And Mitch was like, okay, that was hot scent. We need to start them over on some, somewhere on the trail. So we regrouped, and then we went over to where the deer had crossed the road. And I mean, there was like a dime-sized drop of blood right there. And, we just kind of hung out, and Carrie and Cypress, they went off again, and they went further north than the 90 degree. And I was kind of watching them, and I heard a call over, the walkie-talkie, hey, we just picked up blood.
Bow hunting is a game of confidence, and the last thing that you want to be thinking about when you're at full draw on a giant buck this fall is, I hope this broadhead does its job. I prefer a reliable, fixed blade broadhead that's tough, flies great, and penetrates deeply no matter the arrow setup. And that's why us guys at the Hunter's Advantage shoot Vantage Point archery broadheads. And just a few weeks ago in September, I laid down my first bull elk with the VPA Omegas. In my mind, there's no reason to risk messing with a broadhead that can have a mechanical failure when you can get a super tough, reliable broadhead that's sharp and flies great, and you don't have to worry about the thing failing on you. And if you needed any other reason to choose VPA, they're 100% made in America. To check them out, go to vparchery.com and make sure to use code HA10 at checkout for 10% off your next pack of broadheads. Once again, that's vparchery.com, and make sure you use code HA10 at checkout for 10% off. Now let's get back to the podcast.
Picked up more blood, and Mitch called back and said, I think that's what we already found. And she said, okay, well, my bubble's busted. And I remember I looked at you guys, and I was, I don't think so. I was like, I think that's new, and it was 30 seconds later, and she said, hey, I've got blood underneath the cedar tree. And that's when we were all like, okay, we're on to something different than what we've seen. And so we sit there, and I think she called out wet blood right after that. She said, hey, I got wet blood here. And that's whenever I was, lost a little bit of hope, because Mitch was like, well, how wet is it? And she said, well, it's not dry, but it's not like fresh either. And so he said, well, I don't know, maybe this deer's still alive. He wondered that. And it got quiet, for several minutes, it felt like. And Mitch is sitting there telling us, giving us story time again. And then she says something over the walkie-talkies, and you kind of heard her, and I thought I heard her. And I think I just wasn't sure I wanted to believe. I wasn't sure that I wanted to jump to any conclusions. And so she had to say it about 3 times before any of us got on board with it. She said, tell him to come get his buck. And that was pretty cool. Just the anticipation at that point in time. It had been 14 hours from the time that I had shot that deer to being told over the walkie-talkie to come and put your hands on him. So, a lot built into that recovery, and just the excitement, that, hey, we got him. And so we, high five, and we're excited, and we dredge off into the woods. And sure enough, he was right there in the creek bed, just another probably 100 or 150 yards past that 90 degree detour that they had originally taken. And so, it was awesome. Very cool experience.
Well, and I think that where you see that those dogs getting restarted on last blood, on that track, and going in for a second time after them doing that big old loop on the hot track, is the difference between somebody who knows what their dog is telling them and not. Because he was like, they knew exactly what that meant. That's a hot track. That buck probably didn't do all that. Let's restart him. Whereas I feel like somebody inexperienced right there could have said, man, this buck's doing all kinds of crap. He kind of seems like he's good. He's running through all this. We can't find any more blood. You can take the clues and you can interpret them in a lot of different ways, right? You could say, oh, that hot scent is, that means he's good.
He's alive.
Yeah. I can't do nothing for you. But they didn't do that. And I kind of got the feeling, and I've I've got this vibe off Mitch and Carrie before of like they have no intention of going home, like without that deer. Like I got the intention of like, oh yeah, if it's 8 a.m. we have to stop and go get breakfast, we will. Like we're gonna find this deer. Like we were going up some crap that I'm like, God, I'm getting more out, and Carrie's just like ripping with the dog. Just,
dude, it was crazy. I mean, whenever we went up on the ridge top where they called out hot scent, I mean, it was everything I could do to fast walk, to keep up with Mitch and Bodart. So I mean, it was a workout. We finally got back and regrouped right there where he had crossed the road, and Mitch had to take his jacket off because we were working up such a sweat. But I mean, I agree. That's something that you don't really. I guess you just don't know what to expect whenever somebody comes in. It's like, are they going to give it like one good go? And if they recover the deer, great. If not, no problem. The coolest thing about, I wouldn't say the coolest thing, but a really neat aspect of what they're doing is it's all based off of donation, and the level of determination and stick-to-itiveness that they had from start to finish, the level of professionalism that I felt like they, expressed through their work and just their ability to read their dogs. Those dogs are incredible. Like I've never seen anything quite like it. But two, I think on top of that is they've worked with those dogs so much. They know how to read them and they know how to read what the dogs are telling them, that you simply wouldn't have that ability if you only took them out on 2 trails a year. They're working with these dogs in the off season and they learn body cues and like behaviorisms. And so, that on top of just like their determination to get the job done, because I just didn't know like what were they there for, and so, to see them come in on something that was strictly based off of a donation they didn't even know they were going to receive, and to persevere to that extreme, like I was highly impressed, because they could have, and they probably do. That's the unfortunate thing. It's like they probably, bust their chops for somebody, do all the right things, don't get a successful recovery because of maybe a non-fatal hit, and then maybe don't get compensated for their efforts. And it's like they are really good at what they do. They deserve to be compensated regardless of the outcome. And I was, and I thought that, immediately when they blew through our grid search, I was like, this is legit.
Yeah. So you're sitting there and she's obviously going crazy over the intercom or the radio, and she's like, come get your buck. And I heard it the first time. She said, come get your buck. And she said, come get your buck. And you said, what did she say? She said, come get your buck. And she comes back on, come get his buck. Tell him to come get his buck.
And she said, praise the Lord.
Yeah, praise the Lord. And she came and, we were just wandering through the dark, and he was like, Mitch was like, can you turn your headlamp on? Can you do something? Like, where are you? We're just like sprinting through the creeks up and down. And we walked up on that buck. You had told us, like, and I think it's a classy thing to do, is kind of downplay a buck a little bit, or just don't give him more than what he was, because you ain't put your hands on him yet. But you're like, yeah, I think he's a 120s inch 8. And if he had big eye guards, he'd probably be a mid 130s. And we walked up on him, and the first time you grabbed this beam and pulled him up, I was like, that's a really nice deer. Yeah, that's a cool.
Yeah, I mean his frame, and I don't always get it right. Like I've shot deer and been like, I drilled him, and then you're way back. And in this situation, I was fortunate to have actually perceived what reality was, and I, as far as the shot goes, anyways, and with his rack, I didn't have a whole lot of time to pick him clean, and I didn't really want to. That's some of the joy of getting to hunt public, is like, and that particular property has a really solid, age class, and so odds are, if there's a good sized deer, like he's a mature buck too, and that's, I really like shooting mature deer. That's kind of my, what I find most enjoyable. But I thought his time length was a little longer, whenever I initially saw him, but his frame is really what impressed me, because he came out with his head low to the ground from that creek and then raised it up, and his rack just kind of does that. It just goes up. And he's 14 inches inside spread. He does not have much width at all to him. But you put 25 and is 23 and 7/8 and 25-inch beams on a deer that's 14 inches wide. And that's a pretty unique set of antlers there. And
It's
so,
weird
just very weird. Yeah, very weird configuration, just like up and forward is what it was. And you don't want to be that guy that's shot 150-inch buck and then you show up and he's 120. That's no fun. And it doesn't set you up for like being mentally rewarded for the accomplishment of what you got to do, right? It's like, and why do that? It doesn't matter at the end of the day what his headgear is, but it is cool. And that the beams are what I thought was so neat about him. I was like, that's a cool frame. It's like that deer that we saw several years ago together whenever we hunted from the ground. Is just an 8-point that sports something unique like that is going to get my attention.
Yeah, well, and then we obviously spent an hour and a half sitting there looking at him and admiring him. And Carrie and Mitch really like to, do it right, do it justice with photos, and they take a lot of videos and get good lighting, and they really do the trophy justice. But we just sat there and admired him and looked at him. The shot was exactly what you thought, and it was weird too because, you get these very, very sparse blood trails, right? And and even with a really big, we shoot like a smaller diameter single bevel, and sometimes you get good blood trails, sometimes you don't. But you were shooting a really big expandable with that mega meat, and got a pass through on both sides, and you're expecting like, man, if I knock a triangle out of this sucker that's 2x2, it's impossible.
Yeah, how is he not gonna exactly? And that was the strange thing whenever we got up to him, and that kind of in retrospect helps me imagine what could have happened, because Mitch slid his fingers into the entry wound, and then he had to angle that back probably 2 or 3 inches before he actually found it go into the cavity. And so, just in hindsight, I thought, well, what does that tell me? Obviously he was quartering really hard to me for me to, because really I said 10 to 12 inches behind the shoulder, but I bet it was 6 or 7 inches. If he had been perfectly broadside, then it would have been a double lung, I think, pretty easily. At least back double lung or lung liver. So, for him to kind of angle back in there and then finally find the entry, made me think that deer, whenever I grunted at him to stop him, that he was already at a trajectory that was quartering towards me. And then I grunt, and then he contorts his body even more so in that direction. So you kind of have like the front fold of his chest, and I think whenever I shot that it impacted in one spot, but the skin that was hanging over that actually belonged a few inches forward, if that makes sense. And so when I passed through and he straightened that body out, that skin went back to its kind of like static position, and it covered that entry wound. And then, of course, the exit had the intestines protruding. And so I just don't think there was much of an escape route for the blood to go.
Well, and when Mitch pressed on, once he took and lined those holes up with his fingers, it was just oozing. Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's a good reminder, and maybe just a good, kind of takeaway from the hunt is, good blood is not always an indication of a dead deer, and bad blood is not always an indication of an alive deer. It doesn't, it's not that simple. And I had it explained to me really well one time by Troy Fowler, the ranch farrier that came on, and he's like, imagine the blood trail. Like, you have the hole in the hide and you have the hole in the deer. And when he's running, it's doing this.
Yeah.
And only when they line up does it have the opportunity to come out, right? And so it's like your hole, I'm sure there were times where those holes lined up perfectly and it was like, just a little bit.
Yeah, a little.
And so I think I can tell you from experience and what we've done in the past and mistakes we've made, I'm sure there's been times where we've had similar blood trails and been like, that's it. We're not going to find him. Yeah. So we packed that buck out, went back to the truck. We got back at what, 1:30?
Yeah. It was like 1:15, 1:30.
And that deer had been sitting, and we were talking about the meat still had been good, but Mitch and them were pretty confident that deer had died in the last, I don't know, 2, 3, 4.
2 or 3 hours. But crawled into bed, and by bed I mean the passenger seat of my pickup, and thought about setting an alarm for 5 o'clock because I was dying to go hunt again. I wanted to so bad, but I just kept thinking about the next day and had other obligations that I needed to tend to, and I was like, okay, if I aim to have any sort of a decent time after this point forward, then I need to actually try to get some sleep. And the biggest decision, it hinged on what you told me, because you said I got to get some rest, and I thought, he's just fooling me. He's actually going to go hunt in the morning. I was like, if he's going hunting, I'm going hunting.
Mm-hmm.
And anyways, I went to bed, and I woke up about 45 minutes later, 30 minutes later, and Jake was starting his pickup. And I looked over. I thought he looked at me, but he may not have been able to see me in there. It was dark enough, and I thought about it. I was like, am I going to do this? Like, I could get up, and I thought, again, I'll probably end up falling out of a tree and dying. So I decided against it. But yeah, that kind of wrapped it up. I actually had to go poach your ice out of your maroon Yeti.
Yeah.
So I just took everything and just, including your front quarters, just dumped it into my cooler, because at that point, to go to the gas station, it shows a lack of faith on my end, I suppose. I should have got some ice and just put it in the cooler when we were in town earlier, but
you never know.
Never know.
Never know if you're going to need it. Yeah. It was an awesome hunt. Anytime you're going to the mountains and you're bringing 2, 3, 4 people, that's kind of the hope, right? Like, I'm hoping 1 or 2 of us can connect with one. It's not going to be everybody every time, but
yeah,
let's just chalk it up to beginner's luck, and we'll do it again.
I'm good with it. We'll just press the reset button. I'm looking forward to getting back out there again. I'm actually headed to Eastern Oklahoma tomorrow for a showing.
Why are you going to Eastern you're doing a showing there?
Yeah, I've got a showing in Eastern Oklahoma, and it's a stone's throw from this place. And I was like, I could get back out there at least one sit, take all my stuff with me, one sit, come on home.
Yeah, there you go.
Probably
yeah.
Not
So,
it, but
probably not. So we're sitting here. It's October 23rd. What do you got going on for the next couple of weeks? You headed to Iowa?
Yep. Yeah, we leave for Iowa next Monday. So that'll be the 28th, and we get full 6 days to hunt there. Been applying for 5 years, finally drew in. And it's a, I guess you'd call it semi-guided, I suppose. It's an outfit, but they're not sitting with you. They've got tree stands that are, have been hung, and I think it'll be fun. It'll be a little bit different speed from what I'm used to, going from public to something like that. But I was a special deal, and I'm doing it with my dad, and then obviously Mike, who's a real good family friend of ours, and putting that much time into it year after year, applying. You want to have a good experience, and so we're going to get to do that. I checked the weather the other day, and it looks like rain chances for several of the first days that we're going to be there. But talking to the owner of the outfit, I think I called him 3 weeks ago or something, and just asked him what he thought about his inventory for the year, and built some rapport with him. And finally he told me, he's like, yeah, we've got 2 real big deer, 2 real big ones this year. And I said, oh yeah, like, how good? And he said, well, I think one might push 240, 250. Are you kidding me? And that was what I sent you on.
The one that got killed a few weeks ago?
Yeah. He said, he told me, he's like, you guys are the first group to come in. It'll be you 3 and then 3 others at camp that week. And he was like, well, I'll take that back. He was like, there's one other guy told me that he couldn't make it in any other weekend. He's coming in the weekend before you guys. And he's just there for a couple days or something like that. And he must have pulled out the old smoke pole and shot that dude.
Well, it worked. Yeah, it worked out for him. So he's got some other
Yeah.
big ones, and that's exciting. I don't know a better place to be, in the heat.
Oh man, that
heat
time of year.
pre-rut. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting. I kind of asked him what caliber of deer to even expect, and want to be patient. Exercise some patience, because I mean we've hunted respectable deer around home, 140s all the way to 160s, and I don't think any of us, Mike has shot one deer that would have pushed 170 if it had not broken off 2 or 3 extra points, and that's it, and I mean they've been hard at it for 3 decades, and so pretty special just for them to get to feel like they're in the ball game of hunting like a world class deer, and also just talking with this guy, what's reasonable to expect, if we're holding out for one, a Boone and Crockett whitetail and they're none here, well then I'll just shoot a mature anything below that,
Yeah.
But it sounds to me like they've got some really nice deer. Like 170s is not out of the question if you can hang in there.
So is that your mark, or are you just going to wait till you just going to take it in stride and just see what gets you going?
I think it would be tough for me unless it was like a really unique deer to shoot anything that was below 160.
Yeah, because you shoot a 160 and you're like, okay, that's big everywhere. That translates, right? But you go to Iowa and shoot a 145 incher, you're like, okay, I could have done that at home. So
like I didn't need to apply for 5 years to shoot a 140 inch deer. Like I pass those every year,
Yeah.
And so for me, I think it goes back to that age class deal. Like if a mature, like by mature, I mean like 5.5 plus, or what I think is 5.5-year-old or older, and it's 150s. Obviously, if I'm getting down to the last couple days, I'm probably going to shoot him.
Yeah.
But it would be really hard for me unless it was something really special, really unique to shoot it if it was under 150s, even in the last day or two of being there. Maybe a little over romanticized, but I've also seen enough big deer come out of Iowa that I'm like, okay, it's real. You can get up there and you can actually have a chance at something that you've never been able to hunt before.
Well, I've had conversations with people and they're like, yeah, it's not all that different. We just managed better. And I'm like, no, it is all that different. It is that better. It is that much better because if it wasn't, you would live anywhere. And this is where you chose. And I wouldn't move out of my state for something that I could shoot in my state. So
No. And it's like, whenever we were in Missouri a few years ago and my buddy Cody brought down the deadhead that he had found, and I think it was on like 40 acres or even less than that. And, this deer, I think we scored it at like 197 or something like that. It was like 197 gross. And it's just like some dude's back 40 in Iowa. I'm like, okay, dude. Like it's different, we don't grow those in back 40s in Oklahoma. I mean, maybe not around me.
Yeah, somebody does. Just
somebody does.
Me. Every year I get on there and everyone's like, "Oh man, Oklahoma is sleeper, is big deer everywhere." And I'm like, I'm just as surprised as you when I get on there and I see a 230. I'm like, that's an anomaly. That's not that. That's R1. You're gonna have 15 of those this year come out of Iowa, but you're definitely. You got your GoPro. You're definitely bringing your camera and your cameraman in Iowa, right?
I didn't get a GoPro. I guess I have Jake's GoPro.
Well, that's yours now.
Okay. Thank you, Jake.
If you didn't, that should have been.
Oh, wait, no. I dropped it off right before I left. I forgot he texted me and I dropped the GoPro off. So I've still got my old GoPro, but I don't think I can get it to work.
Well, now Jake's got 2 more. Now he has 2 in his bag. So we're sending. Okay. Note to self: we're sending you a GoPro. You're taking. You got to take a GoPro if you're going to go shoot a booner.
Okay.
That's a requirement.
That'll be good.
Of course, the one day we buy a GoPro for you to put on, and then you're like, I'm not there because I go hunt this other deer, and you shoot a deer first sit. That's exactly how that was going to go.
Yeah, but there will be another time. Hopefully.
Hope so. I hope so. We're kind of ramping up here to the, it's still that time of the year where the best is still ahead. So it's exciting. It's really, really exciting. So I think we're going to go back and try to do some rut hunting in the mountains. I think you're going to be probably tied down with Iowa, but we'll see if we can't get back out to public and chase some more mountain bucks this year, or go rattle one up in Western Oklahoma. We might try. So
Yeah, for sure.
We'll see what the rest of the year holds.
I'll be doing the Panhandle mule deer thing at some point. I mean, I think probably first week of December is what we're looking at for it, and then I'm going to try to get out there, just as maybe like another mini session. Just actually, the landowner sent me and Jason a picture of 2 bucks. Is only about 200 yards north of their guest house. They were, I mean, not very big, but I mean bucks. So that was pretty cool. But yeah, Iowa, and the Panhandle. Those are kind of the 2 things that I've got set in stone for the year. Other than that, I'd like to try to make something happen maybe in December or January if it works.
Yeah, well, we'll see. Congrats. That's an awesome buck. I was excited, and that buck was big enough where I've already shot one pretty much the same morning you did, and Jake was like, would you shoot that buck for your second tag? And I was like, yep. Yeah. It walked by me, I would have shot it. Yeah. We scored it. I let you score my buck and you let me score yours. Yep. And he scored what, 131 and some change?
Yeah, 131 7/8. He wouldn't give me the extra 1/8 on his right main beam.
If he ain't got it, he doesn't get it. That's my motto. That's cool. Well,
but you gotta push. You gotta push for that extra 1/8. I mean, if you're the person whose deer it is, you gotta twist their arm a little bit.
Exactly. Yeah. So, well, we appreciate you coming on and kind of telling the story. This was a kind of a fun, unique mid-October hunt on public. And so for people that want to keep up with you, I mean, obviously you're involved in land real estate and stuff in Oklahoma. Where's the best place for people to check out what you got going on social? Or shoot, maybe there's some rich guy that is on listening to this podcast that is 30, 34 and he wants to buy a property. So where can people get a hold of you?
Yeah, so I guess I have an Instagram. It's pretty insignificant. It's Jake P. Ayers. That's my handle. And then obviously Jake Ayers. You can look me up on Facebook. But if you're looking for a piece of ground in Oklahoma, I probably didn't do the best job of talking up the deer, but we have good deer. They just don't get past like 165.
Yeah, they're 170s and they're everywhere. Please, only on your only on your listings too. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Nobody else sells them.
No. Well, that's cool. Well, like I said, go check them out. And if you guys are listening to the podcast and you enjoy the Hunt Talks, please leave us a rating and review. It helps us grow the show and it helps us reach a broader audience while we're sitting here talking about these mountain bucks throughout the year. So hopefully we'll have a lot more success coming up in the better part of the fall. But we appreciate you guys listening. And with that, we're going to catch you guys in the next one. Bye.
Appreciate it. See ya.